Welcome to Unfamiliar Territory, an anime podcast hosted by two white dudes who've been friends for over 15 years. We talk about the history and influence of anime, as well as review anime new and old, believe in the stars, and sail away for the future into unfamiliar territory.
My name is Grant.
And I'm Brantley. Heads up, spoilers on the way. Check the description, see if you're safe to listen. For any Gen Z listeners who may not know, Rock'em Sock'em Robots was a toy-based competitive game created in 1964. Okay, hey, we'll get to the anime, but just hang with me. I want to put this down here. Two players use levers to shift a plastic robot around an arena, and you push buttons on the levers to essentially punch with the robots. And so the whole goal is that you're trying to pop up the head of your opponent. Once you get the hang of it, there's kind of like a sweet spot you can find where, like, when you push the button, you just kind of get right under the chin and it'll just pop their head up every single time, like no fail. I think TMS Entertainment found their own sweet spot in creating Megalo Box and Nomad, Megalo Box 2. As we were watching this, me for the second time, Grant for the first time, I couldn't help but feel all the way through that they just hit the high notes consistently across both seasons. Though the game they're playing here is not Rock'em Sock'em Robots, it's instead Glad and Sad and Leftists. So very much a game Grant and I like to play. So we're heading in here with a show that's very well produced and earns us a lot of brownie points because it meshes very well with our worldview and political opinions. But anyways, we should probably elaborate a little bit about what Megalo Box is.
Yeah, so Megalo Box, the original first season, came out in 2018 to 2019. It was animated by TMS Entertainment, and it slaps.
Actually, it punches, but
fucking hell.
Sorry. Look, this is the opening window for all my bad jokes.
It's so funny because that sounds like such a good, rehearsed joke, but I was not expecting it whatsoever. So the series is directed by Yu Moriyama, who, as far as I was able to tell, honestly hasn't done too much direction. He's done some background art for Redline. He was the animator director of a couple shows. But not only is he the animation the director for Megalo Box the entire show, he also was the mechanical design. So all of the suit armor was by him too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This show is kind of like sports with very light mecha.
Yeah, that's a good way to put at it. It doesn't really go too much in the gears, but we'll talk about that later. One of the things that I had when I was watching Megalo Box is that it wasn't necessarily a show that I was super vibing with all the time. There were some slow moments that I was a little like not feeling. Mm-hmm. But looking back at Megalo Box and its season 2, the show is nearly perfect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I tried to find ways to, like, think about, like, what I could critique about Megalo Box, and I could not think of a single one. Now, yeah. I'm not saying that everyone is going to enjoy it, though. Mm-hmm. I can definitely see the drama and the slow pace to make people a little iffy on it. Mm-hmm. But it's still, it went out to do what it wanted to do, and it did it with no flaws. Yeah. And it's so good.
Mm-hmm. So to save us the trouble of going through a laundry list of, like, wow, the production is great, wow, the animation is great, wow, the writing is great, all that stuff, we are going to essentially talk about what's special to us in this show. That way, maybe if it if you find that the things we're really enjoying are up your alley, then that's the incentive to go watch this, right? Because it is, slower and, less action-packed than other sports shows, especially the ones in, like, the shonen genre. This isn't Haikyuu, where you're getting, like, high-octane character development constantly rolled out to you, in the form of, this really punched-up dialogue and whatnot. This show has a lot more of a cool head, so, that's what we'll do. We'll highlight what's special to us about this show.
Yeah.
But first, we should probably actually walk you through what this show's about. To make sure that we have plenty of time left over, Grant, here's what I need you to do. You've got 3 minutes, in other words, 1 round, to explain the plot of both seasons of Megalo Box. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right, go.
All right, so Megalo Box is a show about a illegal immigrant named Joe. Well, actually, that's not his name. That is the name that he goes by, but that's what they call him throughout the entire show. Mm-hmm. So Joe is an underground fighter who's been in fixed rings and fixed fights, and that's how he's been getting his money. They pay him to flop, and then he flops, and then that's it. So with that, him and his, I guess, partner would be the best way to say.
Mm-hmm. His second, yeah.
Which I believe is Gansako Nanbu, who they just call Chief for the most part. Or Coach. I can't remember what they call him.
Coach.
But anyway, Coach, yeah. They decide Joe goes off the rails and beats the shit out of one of the people he was supposed to lose to. Because Joe is a good boxer. And he's hot. So
extremely.
Joe and this gets them kind of in trouble with the mob bosses that were fixing the fights. And Gansaku is basically like, hey, what if we take him to Megalo Box? And Megalo Box is this giant tournament of the world's best boxers trying to come together to fight to the top. It's basically mechanized Punch-Out. Mm-hmm. Bunch of different people from different backgrounds, tons of different fighting styles, just beating the shit out of each other. And so Joe and Gansaku adopt a group of orphans to help them create a ring and train Joe. So they form Team Nowhere, and they begin to fight a bunch of different unique people. And the thing that I like about this is, except for any time that the fights actually deal with the person they're fighting, the opponent's incredibly in depth too. So they do all that shit because I gotta keep going. Mm-hmm. And so they win Megalo Box season 1, and they're like, wow, Joe did it. He beat the Russian guy, and he did it without using gears, which is the little robot arms that they use to punch. And then season 2 happens, and Joe's addicted to painkillers. Mm-hmm. And then he tries to get over that and fight in Megalo Box again.
You still got 30 seconds. Do you want to do a little...
It takes place 5 years after, and he kind of abandoned all the orphans, so now all the orphans have a bunch of different stuff, and so there's a lot of drama that goes in with Team Nowhere because Coach died in season 2, and so there's a lot of, they blame Joe for it. Also, there is another, a little bit more in-depth on the illegal immigration coming from Japan. They deal with an entirely new group of people. And Joe loses the final fight in season 2, but he wins the hearts of me.
Right on time. Holy shit, I was literally on the buzzer. Okay. Yeah, so it's more or less the plot. If that sounds at all enticing to you, go watch it. And if that still doesn't have you hooked, then we're going to talk about what's special to us about this show.
So this show is a sports anime, but it's not a sports anime. Mm-hmm. It is a show about people, which I think is overlooked a lot in sports shows. There's a lot of times sports anime like to focus on, it's the underdogs going to win, and they do because they have the heart. But I've done a sport or two in my life. I'm not good at sports, but I'm good at teamwork and people. Mm-hmm. And they focus on that. They go into that. They talk about how everyone a part of this team is important, but they also deal with the interpersonal drama that goes with it. I actually thought that the most exciting part about Megalo Box is the drama that goes in between the characters, and they lean hard into that in Nomad.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a lot of punching in Nomad.
Yeah.
Like, there's plenty of punching, but there's not it's if you told me that if Nomad didn't have any fighting except for like the final scene, mm-hmm. I honestly don't think you would lose that much.
Yeah, this is definitely not your shonen type of sports show. Not at all. You also really don't get a lot of like pure evil types, especially not the characters who get developed. They're usually far more nuanced than that. As Grant mentioned, like everybody's getting that like character development treatment, but it usually doesn't just come down to like, I want to be the best. Like, you know, they give it the heart it needs, you know, per character, to actually form a story around each fight. So you're not getting a fight per episode most of the time.
No.
Like, you know, like sometimes they'll cram a few quick fights into one episode with some like nobody characters. Sometimes you have like, you know, an entire episode of build up. And all that is to the show's betterment, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that is good about these slow build-ups to the fight is that when it becomes a big fight, you are almost dreading it, especially in season 2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's a lot of death flags in season 2, like a ton of death flags. And so every time that they go back into the ring, there is a chance that someone's gonna die, and it makes you tense up. And they kept that throughout the entire show. And I know that we don't want to go too far into it, but the animation style of it can be really simple at times, but when they want to go hard, they go hard.
Mm-hmm.
And I have very I don't know what the word for it, but when I see people get hurt, I'm like, oof, ouch, pain, empathy. And goddamn, did watching this show make me wince so many times.
Yeah. I think mentioning like death and whatnot is important because this is essentially a spiritual successor to Ashita no Joe.
Which we have spoiled on another completely irrelevant. I guess it was sort of relevant. It was a reference in our Danganronpa 1.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Review.
Yeah, so if you want to learn the ending or a critical plot detail of Ashita no Joe, then don't watch it. Instead, watch our 2-hour Danganronpa review.
I mean, we can. I think we need to talk about it. Though.
Yeah,
we need to talk about the ending. Here.
So this is the Champion Joe 50th anniversary project. Megalo Box is the, you know, sort of like IP reboot of Ashita no Joe. In Ashita no Joe, Joe dies in the ring. And that's like, you know, whoa, big surprise, he fought to the very end, he never gave up, that kind of thing. This show does not do that. For one, it's like, I would say like it's definitely not like a reboot in the sense that it's like, oh, it's all your favorite familiar faces again. There are definitely similarities. You've still got Joe, but Joe isn't the same Joe. You're gonna find like, hey, this character, Nanbu, looks a lot like a character from Ashita no Joe. Serves the same role, not the same name, not the same background. You know, there are similarities, but they're very different. And I can appreciate that, having seen a couple of these, like, you know, reboot or reimagining type projects out of other companies. You know, for example, Tatsunoko creating Gatchaman crowds, which I liked when I watched it. And Yatterman Night, which I did not like at all. Of these different, like, types of shows, this is my favorite by far.
Yeah.
And it's because it takes some, these parts of the original and totally flips them on its head. So for example, in this show, Joe doesn't die. Straight up. He doesn't.
And my goodness, this show talks so hard about him dying. Mm-hmm. He has an illness. He passes out all the time. They talk about how they're like, if you think I'm gonna die, throw in the towel. And then it's like, Joe wants to die.
There are characters who like will tell him straight to his face, "You'll die before you give up boxing." It doesn't happen.
And what's wild is in the final fight of Nomad, they're also doing death flags for his opponent.
Yeah.
There are so many death flags in the second season, and they do not die.
Uh-huh.
There is a death in the ring, but we'll talk about that later. But
yeah,
none of the main characters die like that.
Uh-huh.
And, God, was it... It was an interesting use of tropes. Like, like death flags are a thing, right? Like, the trope exists because it's used constantly. Mm-hmm. And the fact that this show just kept hammering them on and then just completely gave it the middle finger is honestly a very interesting writing device.
Yeah. It is speaking on the topic of martyrdom and all the things connected to it. So to say that we're not just like, oh wow, they did the subversion. They didn't do the thing we thought they were going to do. It's more than that. It's that because of the choice they made, we like that better than them just say, killing Joe again. I think that the writing turned out more interesting and spoke to me as a result.
Yeah. Okay. No, I agree.
Something else I really want to hammer in. This is a show about immigrants. Straight up.
There is while the main premise of the show is boxing, the amount of focus on immigration rights and extreme poverty versus extreme wealth, it's pretty out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like. We might luck out right now in that Yakuza 7 recently released, and that's also about like, poverty and homelessness. But outside of that, like, I don't know that many shows off the top of my head that cover this topic and do it really well. It's not the usual kind of pull yourself up by your bootstraps show. There are elements of that here, but usually by the end, they've worked those over and said, hey, the fact that you're expected to do that is fucked up. And there's lots of systems against you that lead to this in the first place. Again, it's talking a lot of lefty things that Grant and I really truly believe in. So
yes, yeah. And what's interesting about the show is that it takes place like super far in the future. I think Brantley was like, yeah, Joe was born in like 2076 or something like that. Like his fake ID says 2076.
It's somewhere in there, right? Like we're far beyond like, like, oh, the distant future of 2030 something. No, like this is
it's far, but unless you are watching the wealthy people, you don't see any future tech. Mm-hmm. You see some shitty trucks, you see people working with their hands, and that's represented in the way that Joe fights in the first season. Mm-hmm. And because
without gear.
And they do it in such a good way because the first kind of hurdle they have of entering Megalo Box or Megalomania is that
Megalonia, I think.
Oh yeah, Megalonia.
It might as well be Megalomania, whatever. Like that's what it's building off of, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, the first hurdle they have to get is they got to get Joe gear because Joe can't. His gear broke, and they can't afford to get new gear. And they decide, well, fuck it. If we can't afford this, let's just make you the goddamn best boxer in the world, and then gear will do shit for you.
Mm-hmm. He's fast.
And
he's, able to essentially shrink down in the ring as a result. So, like, he embraces that. Essentially what he's doing is not assimilating into, this culture, and instead it's like, I'm going to be me. I'm not going to be indoctrinated or transformed just because I live here now. I still get to be me.
Yeah, and there's also, like, one of the big things he does is his ability to download his opponents. It gets tiresome, I would say, for some people, because it normally ends with Joe figuring out the way his opponent fights and then beating the shit out of him. Mm-hmm. But you gotta watch Joe get the shit beat out of him for like 15 minutes. But it's still a good way of not only representing the unconformity, but also this tech divide, this basic these luxuries that these wealthier boxers have. Mm-hmm. And it's a direct parallel to this futuristic capitalist driven Japan. And then you also have the fact that the people designing these gears are trying to sell them to the military industrial complex, and that is framed as a very bad thing. Mm-hmm. And that's just Team Nowhere we're talking about. Mm-hmm. We get so much more. And that's where this show really shines, is its ability to make all the characters good.
Mm-hmm. It really rounds things out, yeah. Speaking of the characters, like, I want to underscore this. A significant amount of them are dark-skinned characters. Essentially, like, they don't really talk a whole lot about the ethnicity of the characters. For example, we don't know what ethnicity Joe is. We don't know what ethnicity Nanbu is, but they have tan skin and curly hair. That's not normal for, like, your anime leading man. And this show is decked out with them, especially in season 2. I think this is important because so often, manga and anime creators have historically done a poor job of depicting ethnicity accurately. I think part of it is because you're, delimiting the amount of detail you're drawing on the characters and how much shading you have for lighting. So, like, for instance, if someone has a unique nose bridge, it's a little harder to show. But even then, we've seen it done before, decades ago. It certainly can be done, just doesn't get done well often. So the fact that we have, a wealth of really strong, character here, characters who aren't just like, sort of, they're vaguely this or that, but we didn't really try to draw them that way. The show doesn't fall into that range. This is more in the Cowboy Bebop zone, where you can look at a character and identify, they're from this part of the world, even if the show isn't telling you that. And I think that's important for representation. I think it's important that in the visual representation of a person, that someone could see themselves in that, instead of just being given say, like, Nadia, Secret of Blue Water, whose titular character, Nadia, is African. Like, she has dark skin, but she's also got, like, purple hair and the same facial features as practically everyone else her age in the show. There's jokes about, like, how Shinji Ikari from Neon Genesis Evangelion is just a boy version of Nadia from Nadia Secret of Blue Water. The fact that people can make that parallel and you can, like, copy paste their faces onto each other and there's hardly a difference is pretty upsetting, considering that one is an African character and one is Japanese. that's the kind of thing I'm trying to say here. We're super used to seeing characters, even, the fact that anime characters don't really look Japanese when it comes down to their features. Here's a show that's fighting uphill against that, and I appreciate that a lot.
I have some theories about Joe. I think Joe's American. Mm-hmm. His little army jacket has the American sergeant symbol, and this show does take place after a war. Mm-hmm. And they don't really go too in depth in the war, but I think he's American. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't matter. That's kind of the interesting thing about Megalo Box, mm-hmm. is that for some people it doesn't matter. Joe, it doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter where Joe's from. And that's because that's how Joe cares about it. Mm-hmm. But it makes it about like the people that think about them, mm-hmm. right? It's about society as a whole looking at them. Like Yuri, for instance, who is not the antagonist of the first season. He's a good guy, but he's Joe's rival.
Yeah.
And he's Russian, I think. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of like talk about him as a who he is, where he's from, what his life is, and his whole character arc is him throwing off the shackles of the corporate world that has kind of used his image to sell things and becoming a boxer again. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of how the show focuses on things. It's about, where they're from or not, and then how society looks at you, and then how you are going to develop past what society thinks you are.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I think it's incredibly important, for example, that we can look at Chief, and he is, speaking Spanish and singing in Spanish, and we can identify like, oh, okay, so this is a Hispanic community we're seeing, and they're, preserving their heritage. That's fantastic. But we don't need them to then sit down and say, by the way, here's where I come from, here's the city and country, and here's why I think this should matter. The characters don't need to belabor those points. We don't need that spoken in dialogue, because the experience is what reads. This show is exemplary in that the character's race is a lived experience rather than just a name thrown on something. We don't need to know where in the world Joe is from to be able to look at him, his status, his place in the world, and understand, oh, he's subjugated in these ways. He is victim to the systems that encapsulate him. He has that, lived experience under a racist capitalist society. It's felt rather than spoken, and I think it works.
Absolutely.
And also just it's so cool to have this show and just look at this cast and think like, God damn, this is a lot of people to cosplay now, that, for the people who are out there looking just like, I want to be like a cool anime protagonist. And here's someone who's got my skin tone. You've got a wealth of options in this show. Really good ones, from all sorts of backgrounds and directions and ages. Like, it's just hypes me up.
Yeah, it's pretty dang good. Mm-hmm. This show slaps. Or,
do you have other things you want to mention, things that are special to you about this show?
The ending song is really good in both seasons. Oh, God, yeah. I like that Joe has a motorcycle.
Hey, here's a fun question. Who do you think is worse to their motorcycle, Joe or Tsubasa from Symphogear?
Surprisingly, Joe. Despite the fact that Tsubasa blows up so many motorcycles, we actually see her take care of it and try. Joe just like crashes it like 6 times. There is a wolf motif. I never really got it.
I mean, it's that Joe's a lone wolf. If you listen to the full opening of the first season, there are lyrics like don't ask me why, I'm gonna bite, and like I'd rather be a rabid animal than your piece of meat. Like, that's it. That's Joe.
It's that, but it's fun.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and the wolves are another form of death flag. Because like you
see so many dead wolves.
Yeah, there'll be symbology of like
there's literally falling dead wolves in the opening in Nomad.
Yeah. The show does love its symbology. Like,
okay. Hold on. I got something. Because Yuri also has a
dog wolf thing.
Yeah,
I want to say it's a wolf, but it's probably more like a dog.
It's like a husky.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all prim and proper and like purebred, and then Joe's wolf that he always sees is like a mutt and like mangy, just
separated from its
I guess
pack. Yeah,
you know what? Yeah, it works. It works.
Mm-hmm.
And like Yuri's dog is in the second one, and he's old, and that's fun.
Yeah. Cool. It's important to say too that just having symbology isn't necessarily a good thing. Like, I mean, Garzy's wing does symbology, right? Like, and if you haven't seen Garzy's wing, go watch that even before you watch Megalo Box. You know what?
Garzy's wing is an experience.
It'll make
3 episodes.
It's an OVA. It'll make Megalo Box feel even better when you're done. So, like, you know, safe to say, I think the symbology in this show, although it can be kind of blunt, it's used effectively. It's not subtle, but it does help your understanding of what's going on in a way that's not verbal. You know, it's the way I see it. It's kind of like how someone's facial expression or gestures give you an idea of how they're doing, besides what's just actually coming out of their mouth. Again, it's not subtle. Like, the opening scene is a scorpion crawling over like a run over dead worm, and then Joe runs it over too, and then he runs over a one-way sign. Like, it's pretty forward spoken. But anyways, just some things I want to slip in here before we move on. Some things that I particularly like. There's no romance in this show, front to back. And not that I like dislike romance. Like, you know, I do, in fact, and some of my favorite pieces of media are romantic in nature. But I think it's nice to get a break from that. There's not even a whole lot of like your usual shonen bromance either. Like, or it's more about like found family and community in the show. And I feel like that's the right angle for this pacing and this tone of series. It's just refreshing. You know, once again, it's like the star-studded person of color cast that we have, in that it's done well and it's not common. I think we need that to be, you know, breathed into the industry every now and then, to say, hey, we know what works, but you can work with what's not common too.
No, I don't think you can.
And I know Grant already said it, but I also really love the world this takes place in. Would you call this cyberpunk? Is that fair?
Absolutely. I mean, like, it doesn't really lean heavily into the genre tropes. Like, you don't have like neon lights. It's kind of like a more muted cyberpunk. But, you know, it has high wealth inequality and terrible corporate leaders. I think that's all you really need for cyberpunk. You put it in the future, and you just say capitalism bad, and then make the good guys impoverished. Mm-hmm. And there you go. You have a cyberpunk.
Yeah, it's It's really good. I think things look unique, but not necessarily like otherworldly. There's almost like I don't know what era, maybe like a 60s era vibe
Kinda
to
like
the
Ghost...
characters' designs.
Yes. Yes.
I really dig that. Especially like Yuri. Yuri is like the clear example of like, whoa, this guy looks like he comes out of the original Ashita no Joe.
Yuri has the highest cheekbones of any anime character. It is in the Guinness Book of World Records. It says Yuri, highest cheekbones. And the sharpest jaw.
Yeah.
He's so fucking, like, wiry, too.
Yeah.
He looks good. Like, he is a good designed character, but you're absolutely right. He is so, like, 1960s anime.
Yeah. Oh, damn it. Okay, I looked it up. It's 70s. 70s was Ashita no Joe, but even still, like, there's something 60s about
how
what
can people trust us to to listen to our opinions on anime when you don't even know the year that Ashita no Joe came out? Yuri does have a terrible haircut, though.
It's pretty bad.
It's like it's like he needed to get a haircut. And all the hairdressers were busy, so he went to a Great Clips. That's based on a true story.
He went to a Great Clips, but the barber was also wearing boxing gloves because they were his next match. So they did a quickie, and then they went and fought each other.
Yeah. Quickie normally has a different connotation.
Oh, sorry. I mean... just as awkward with the boxing gloves on. I don't even know, like, if I have a good comparison for the aesthetic of this world design. You've seen more, like, cyberpunk and post-apocalyptic stuff. Is there, like, something that this, like, closely aligns to?
It kind of reminds me of Acura.
Yeah, I can see that.
With the really, really, like, close... Because, like, Acura, a lot of the times, you don't take place in the city, you're outside of it, right? You see all the tall buildings and all the lights over there. That's where Joe takes place. Although, the color scheme is a little bit more Ghost in the Shell. Because Ghost in the Shell is very muted, very brown for a lot of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where it is.
Yeah. You know, this is weird. I'm going to say... Aside from those, the closest thing I could come up with was Pokemon Coliseum.
That's a fucking stretch.
What?
But
No,
let me rephrase that. Not a stretch in that you're wrong. It's not a reach.
Okay.
It is you stretched really far to pull out a very odd example that is very close to being right.
I feel so validated. Thank you.
Because I think about the first time you're in Pokemon Coliseum and you come to that bar.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like a train that's in the middle of the fucking desert.
Yeah. Exactly. You got like you have like really low tech and really high tech. Like the cipher buildings and stuff are all like, you know, electronic screens and holograms and whatever, and, you know, bright lights. And then you're in like Pyrite Town, and it's like, just like, all right, you're walking on however the dirt's feeling today, and there's, you know, dust blowing in through the town and whatever, you know, etc., etc.
Yeah. Hey, do you think they call it Pyrite Town because it's a fake town and pyrite is fool's gold?
I sure hope so. Because that's a really good... I get... This makes me want us to have a Pokemon Coliseum episode, because it sounds like you've got some good things to say about it.
Yeah, we'll talk about fucking Pokemon Coliseum another time.
Will we? Oh my god. Okay, we can't Cubix this. We have to move on. Okay, I think it's time we talk about characters. There's a lot of them in this show that I think deserve mention. So to try to cut down on this and streamline things a little, I'm going to ask that Grant give his first impressions of a character and then his final impressions. So, you know, what do you think when when you first saw this character and you were first exposed to them, and then after you've seen their arc, their development, whatever happened to them, how do you feel then? Okay.
That sounds good. Real quick, one more thing about fucking Pokemon Coliseum. You do just let a guy out of prison and he gives you a TM for it.
I never noticed that. It must have totally gone over my head as a kid.
He gives you thief. If you find the jail key, and then you unlock this jail cell and he leaves. And then you can get thief from the jail cell.
Oh my gosh. I mean, that works, because canonically, your main character in that game is a thief. You start off by betraying the team you're working with, and you steal their cool
cannot keep talking about Pokemon Coliseum.
Okay, we're moving on. Characters. Okay, we're gonna try to leave Joe for last. So, I don't really have like an order to this, and if Grant wants to leapfrog from one, like segue from one character to another, we'll just go with that. But I do have what I think are like the major characters written down. So, how do you feel starting with Nanbu? In other words, Gansaku. In other words, Coach.
So he's an interesting character because he's honestly kind of a huge piece of shit for like the longest time. He doesn't give a shit about Joe. He looks at Joe as a way to get money. He's nice enough, but, you know, he'll be nice to Joe and then literally go and talk to a mob boss about how he's going to let Joe get his ass kicked. There is a really fun scene where he's about to get... He goes in to confront the mob about Joe. And they're like, well, if you don't do it, you know, we're gonna do something to you. And as they're doing it, they're eating fish.
Mm-hmm.
And they pop the fish's eye out. And they pop his eye out in retaliation. I felt so smart for seeing that. I saw that happen. I'm like, oh, he's going to lose his other eye.
Yeah.
So that's good. But by the end of it, I really like how he kind of accepts his role as not just coach, but sort of as the surrogate parental figure for all these kids that have become part of Team Nowhere. Mm-hmm. I really like what they do in Nomad, because he's dead in Nomad
from the start,
from the start. But you see him in flashbacks, but Joe also hallucinates that he's there, and so does what's his name?
Sachio?
God, Sachio. Yeah. So it's really interesting to see how they're able to carry his beliefs and personality into essentially the hallucination of the people that loved him. Mm-hmm. It's pretty good. I like him a lot. I think he's a very good mentor character in terms of also being a piece of shit. Mm-hmm. That growth is really satisfying to see.
Yeah. He's the kind of character that, like, every time you see him on screen, you're kind of gritting your teeth.
Yeah.
But he's also very charming to watch in action. Like,
yes.
I mean, also there's the part where he took a knife and stabbed it through a metal table, so, like, that happened.
Yeah. He's the kind of character that when he's on screen, you don't know if he's going to do something shitty or something good, and that's kind of fun.
Exactly. He keeps you guessing. He's like the big plot vehicle for season 1. He's kind of what's steering everything along. Basically, you're watching him bet on, these flop matches to start. But then Joe comes forward and it's like, all right, I want to do this clean from now on. I want to go to the top because I can do this. Especially after he's been, urged on by Yuri, and taunted a bit. And so, in that moment, Nanbu's like, okay, you know what, let's do it. And his past as, a coach with Aragaki, kind of comes back around. His heritage, I think cultural and also, regardless of what I think literal, as a career coach, comes back around from, Joe's spirit. Which, to say on the cultural part of this, I think they give the impression that he also has a Hispanic background. There's a cross hanging up in his car that I think when translated we found out came around something to like God will push you underwater but he won't drown you, or something like that.
Yeah.
And like that's very much what he and Joe are up against, that their system, their God, has made it very difficult for them to live, but they can get by, and so they're gonna essentially fight God upwards through Joe's youth and energy and integrity. I also think it's interesting that or I could foresee Nanbu's alcoholism being kind of an illustration of how living alone means living with your vices, and how that carries to Joe when Joe is all alone at the beginning of season 2, and Joe gets hooked on painkillers. I wouldn't be surprised if that was intentional. It's like for Joe to sort of live like Nanbu has, and even for Joe to start coaching for a while with Chief in season 2. I feel like there's something there, but then again, that's just my interpretation. And I also really honestly feel like his death in between seasons is heart-wrenching and effective. I think it's interesting that what takes him is cancer. It's not like the doctors aren't negging him for like, oh, look at all this alcohol did this to you. It's just cancer. It kind of comes out of nowhere, and it's something that probably couldn't be foreseen too well, and there's not much to stop it besides a large amount of money for better treatment.
Yeah, well, and one of the things is that for the longest time you don't know what killed him.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a storm that happened.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, did he die in the storm? And then as more and more things are revealed from the flashback, you're like, no, it just he was old,
mm-hmm.
and he couldn't fight cancer. And you're like, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
It's very powerful, and it's sad, and I'm sure there's some people that relate to that on like a heavy level.
Mm-hmm. For the distance that Nanbu sort of travels from, his high point with Aragaki to his low point alone to his high point with Team Nowhere, it really, I think, speaks that like he's just taken. This wasn't a bet he lost. He didn't get to make the bet. That's just how his life worked. And I think that brings everything down to earth for season 2. Okay, but enough on Nanbu. Let's move on. How about Sachio?
I like Sachio. I really like. I remember reading a lot of people's comments about him in the second season,
mm-hmm.
about how he's kind of a dick, but he's also like 16,
mm-hmm.
and teenagers are just sometimes dicks.
Mm-hmm.
But like when you see Sachio first, he's just this. I mean, like he's because on Ashita no Joe, there's it's like Sachia. Or
I don't remember her exact name, but yeah, there's like a Sachio analog character.
Yeah, and it's very much that a wide-eyed child who looks at Joe as sort of this hero, this person who's gone from being impoverished to being the favorite to win the world's largest boxing tournament. And in the first season, he kind of serves as that, right? There's
mm-hmm.
not much more to him.
He gives guidance on things and helps Nanbu coach,
Yeah. He's smart, and he has stuff that he does, but in terms of character position, he's not really there yet. But it sets him up to be this incredibly
high potential and
yeah. Well, and in season 2, you first see him, and he's doing the same thing Joe was doing. He's fighting underground and getting his ass kicked over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
Although he's not throwing his matches, he just can't win.
Mm-hmm.
And when Joe gets back into the ring, Sachio becomes coach for him. You know, he's the one in charge of throwing the towel. He's the one. He's there by Joe's side, and he goes through this long like emotional trauma of like, hey, Joe left. Joe fucked us over. Joe wasn't here when we all needed him, and we shouldn't like him. And that's a valid emotion to have. What Joe did was shitty. And Sachio calling Joe out for being shitty is not a bad character. But the lack of forgiveness is also not a bad character. And I like him and Joe's drama they have in season 2. Where they're trying to find this common ground while also just being genuinely upset with each other. And it ends with them fighting. And it's good. I think it's good.
Yeah.
He also raps in season 1. I always forget that happens.
That is true.
He does rap.
Yep.
That's it.
That's it. Yeah, you said basically everything I would have wanted to say. The one nice thing about season 2 is that they put his character in motion based on his plot setup in season 1, where his father, an engineer at Shirato, was killed for his idea. And so essentially they're saying, hey, Sachio, you're kind of following in your father's footsteps based on what you're doing with technology with us. Like you've really got a knack for this. But in trying to follow Joe and make a living, he ends up doing stuff that he's really not suited for, He's probably starting a lot earlier than, well, at least that we saw Joe. And he's expecting to be as good as Joe at that time, which is really unrealistic, to put yourself up at. He's really kind of being hard on himself and putting himself in these really tough conditions, because that's how he's seen success modeled, is that Joe steps into the ring and he guns it and takes the victory. And so for Sachio to learn that there are other ways, and in the end sort of find like, yeah, I do want to do more of this engineering stuff. I want to learn. I want to sort of follow what my father laid out for me, even if I didn't get to know him well enough in the end. I think that's really nice to have.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
Okay. Next up, some of these I'm going to cluster together. So, Oicho, Bonjiri, and Santa.
So, interesting enough, I really like how Oicho in season 2 actually gets separated a little bit more. In the first season, they're just kind of shithead kids. They don't really do anything.
They sneak into matches and they're background characters. That's about it.
Yeah. But once again, that's to set them up to have this completely focused season 2. So Oicho she becomes the apprentice to Abuhachi, who is a mechanic. Yeah, and so but she's also the one that Joe sees first. And she's also the one that's not, like, she's fairly neutral to Joe for most of it. She's not super aggressive, she's not super against him, but she's like, yeah, I do not want you in my life, but I'm not going to be I'm not going to be mad about it. And also, Sachio's kind of being a little dick, so maybe put him in his place. Bonjiri is in the same boat. I really like that he goes from, they do a good job at making these kind of comedic side characters into, like, actual adults. Bonjiri creates a restaurant, and that serves as sort of this meeting point since Team Nowhere Jim is gone. And it becomes a plot device because he can't pay the rent, and Sachio can't bring in the money, and then Joe brings in the money for him by flopping. And it's a very it's kind of like a way to give humility to Joe, and Bonjiri's kind of he doesn't care, right? He's a chef. He has a restaurant, and it's a good way to do it. And then I really like Santa's. I like that Santa's a reporter. I like that he started off wanting to talk about boxing, and that's where he ended up. I think it's a really good way of portraying how to get kids interested in making something of themselves, because it isn't, oh, they went to school and they all got jobs and they all buckled down really hard. They all followed the passions that they had from when they were kids. And they became fairly successful with it. And I think that's a really good message that you don't always see. And it's not like a big message of this show, but it definitely is nice to see that.
Yeah, totally. I like that their little group has like all of your different possible responses to what Joe has done, all the different judgments, you know.
Yes.
You've got Santa on one end who's like, hey, this could be actually pretty lucrative for us now that Joe's back. And you've got Sachio on the other end of that spectrum who's like, I want nothing to do with Joe. And Oicho and Bonjiri are in between there, you know. I think it really I just like watching how they react to that. And, you know, it makes Joe's return a lot more heavy than just like, Joe, you're back! Hooray! You know, like it's so much more interesting than that.
Yeah, I agree. They made them. It's also kind of a good way to kind of fill in that gap, because there's a long time where you don't know how long it's been since Joe left. They don't state it. The first time you kind of realize how long he's been gone is when you see Sachio, and Sachio in the original one is a interesting character design. She's just like a
Oicho,
yeah. But it was one of those things where it's like, oh, Oicho is a girl. You don't know in the first season because they don't really get too much characterization. And that's it, right? That is where you're like, oh fuck, Joe fucked up. And Oicho's the one that lets him know that.
The fact that you're getting these characters and you're like, oh my god, that's Sachio. You know, oh my god, that's Santa. Like, that's real. Like, you know, you and I are old enough to have family members who have, you know, gone through that. You know, where not only like the people we've grown up with, but like, you know, relatives who are younger than us and watching them grow up, and like the small spaces of time in which they become a different person. This show, I think, landed that better than practically any other anime I've seen.
Also, they have really good outfits.
They do, yeah.
The costume design, but the fashion design in this show is really good.
Yeah, let's take a sidebar here. Like, round of applause for the fashion design, because this show just pops off. Like
I like Santa's like sort of ill-fitted like sports jacket with like a loose tie. Bonjiri having like the bandana keeping his hair out of his face, and then Sachio wearing the jean jacket, and then like going back to like season 1, the bomber jacket that Joe wears is just so iconic. And then in season 2 they give him a beard, and a better jacket.
Yeah, season 1 I was like, it's so hard to beat these like flared out bell bottom slacks that Joe has. And then season 2 Joe walked in, I was like, oh, that's how you do it.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah. They really went hard on the character design, and I'm actually going to mention the character. So the character designer for the original show was Hiroshi Shimizu, who Also, and this one that just like popped into mind was the Michiko Daihatchin character designer, and it makes so much goddamn sense.
Yeah,
there is so much you can take from like the hair is big, just like it is in Michiko Daihatchin. You have the Latin influence. He's also the chief animation director for Rolling Girls.
Huh.
That's just an interesting fact. But in season 2, they do have a different character designer. So this person probably took the original designs and was the fashion designer for this. And that's Ayumi Kurashima, who was the Devilman Crybaby character designer for the new one. They also did Bonu no Zamdo, which I don't know anything about, and Eureka 7.
Oh, props to both. Excellent character designs in both seasons.
Yeah, so it is a very, the characters are very good.
Yeah,
like looking.
Yeah.
Let's talk more about them.
Yeah. Next up, Aragaki.
Aragaki is probably the character that made me cry the most.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked about how there's a war in this show, and Aragaki's the only character that really goes into what it did. And he lost both his legs in the war, and he went to war after he was going to be a Megalo boxer. So he was Nanbu's former boxer, the coach's former boxer, and then he went to war, lost both his legs, and then Nanbu just did not talk to him, which is good parallel for what Joe did to Nanbu in season 2.
Oh, yeah.
And
there's a whole layer of tragedy to the plot of it, why Nanbu leaves him behind. But anyways.
Yeah. So I love Aragaki. He could have been an easy one-off character, but he pops up all the time. So he is one of the reasons that Joe gets noticed, because I think he's like 7th in Megalo Box or Megalonia, yeah. And so he's like, I want to fight Joe, and he wants to fight Joe because it's Nanbu's student. And they fight, and as they're fighting, Aragaki is like, yeah, this is my last fight. The doctor said that I will lose more of my legs if I keep fighting like this. And I wanted to fight you last, Joe. There's a really, really tragic part that deals with him contemplating suicide, which is a very, big issue in a lot of mental health for veterans in a lot of places. So delving, it is like less than 5 minutes, and in that time there's so much emotion, and the voice acting during that time is so damn good.
It's bone chilling. Yeah, I just think he's a really bold character to include. Again, like, I obviously we appreciate like the attention to detail and the post-traumatic stress that he experiences, and to go through with that attempted suicide scene, like, that's dark, but they did pull it off, and I think it's better as a result because people can see that, ultimately, like, I'm glad that we see a lot of him. I think that's what his character deserves, is retribution. After Nanbu thought he was dead because they reported him as such, and it turns out he comes back alive, basically a ghost. I'm glad that he's able to come back into the picture and live again, to find a new team, and to still have a presence. He deserves that. This so easily could have been just like a tone deaf vengeance story. Like, I went to war and I got blown up and I'm mad about it, but it's not that.
There's very little hate that comes from Aragaki.
Yeah.
it seems like it's less hate and more of closure. And the fact that he hangs around and helps Joe afterwards is really good. I like the friendship he develops with Joe.
Yeah, to be real, I wanted him to win over Joe. Like,
yeah,
as high as the stakes were. Okay.
Yeah.
Next up, another cluster. Let's put together Mikio and Yukiko.
So Mikio just wants to cook. He just wants to chill. No, he is. So Mikio and Yukio are. They are the brother and sister of the Megalo Box Corporation, like the one that makes the gears and is sponsoring the big tournament.
Shirato.
Yeah. And Mikio is a boxer, and his gear is AI. He's kind of the first big hurdle that Joe fights. I mean, there's Sharks and Jima, but...
And Arigaki's a tough fight, too, but...
Yeah, but Mikio is like, hey, this guy literally has gear that will predict your movements.
Yeah, he's the oh fuck territory.
I really liked how his story arc was about getting humbled, right? Because he has this huge idea that he's so good and he's so great, and then it's also like, but is it me or my gear? And then, you know, he doesn't want to... He doesn't give two shits too much about the company, which is nice. Like, he gave most of it to his sister, right? And so he's like, I just want to fight in the gear that I made. I want to win using my brain. And then when Joe beats him, he has this realization of like how he shouldn't be doing what he's doing. Like, he's like, I have this entire company and this privilege of being able to be this ingenious when it comes to developing this stuff, and I'm using it to try and fight people. And so he just goes into the woods. He also becomes and like after that in second season, he becomes like a professor and a scientist. And it's a really good character arc for him. It's really simple. He doesn't really have too much besides that, except when he helps out Yuri. But I like his. It's a very concise character arc. It's probably like the least dramatic, but it's also one that I think most people have some sort of struggling with, where their sense of identity is shattered by something, and they have to kind of reflect on who they are. It's good. His sister, on the other hand, is interesting. Yukiko is a businesswoman. She likes the capitalism. She wants to sell her gear towards to the military-industrial complex. She has a similar character arc to her brother, except instead of it being about, oh, should I box? It's about, should I use my money and wealth to help people or make weapons? And it's help people. But her character arc is a lot. She plays pretty much primary antagonist in the first season. She's she's mean to Yuri about him and dealing with his gear. She's trying to sell her research, and then they don't want it at the army. Her brother abandons her to go live in the woods. And so she kind of gets this sense of identity crisis at the end, where she meets Sakuma, who is a entrepreneur who is trying to invest into their company, and he's a bastard.
We'll have a whole dedicated time for Sakuma. Yeah,
but yeah, I think Yukiko and her brother and Mikio have a very similar character arc. I think it just is affected differently.
Would you say that those two start as a good example of like lawful oriented characters? Where Mikio is like, hey Joe, I know you want to fight, but that's illegal, so I'm just gonna shut it down. You know, that kind of like, like, and Yukiko's kind of the same way, which is just like, yeah, this match isn't happening no matter how amazing this was. I did think it was interesting that here are these people getting in the way of Joe's dream, and they're not wrong in the system that has been built, but of course not, because they partially built that system, like they're totally ingrained in it. They have to separate themselves from Shirato in order to realize, like, yeah, this is what we're doing is not great. When they're like, hey, take care of Sachio, and Yukiko's like, no, I don't think so, because I've got a company to run. It's like, oh, so you're gonna turn down a kid? Like,
I kind of forgot that happened.
Yeah, it's like, again, it's that humbling, it's that bringing back to humanity thing, that they can technically be in the legal right, but they're doing pretty awful things, as long as they're divorced, from all of that inside their company.
Yeah.
And I also think it's funny that then Shirato is like Beans compared to Roscoe, who we find out is above them, and they become like the big deal in season 2. Isn't that just too real?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So this one will probably be quick. Fujimaki, the loan shark.
He's a dick. I mean, fucking. He's not even listed on my anime list.
I think he is. That's how I found his name again. Anyways.
Yeah, I mean, like, he exists as a catalyst to kind of put some... Oh, yeah, he is. Yeah. No, and how does he have more member favorites than Oicho? I don't fucking know. He's a piece of shit. Get the fuck out of here.
Yeah. I do think that he and Sakuma end up being compelling as antagonists because they're really clear benefactors of systemized violence. They're perpetuators of everything that's been going wrong in this world of Megalo Box. But outside of that, I don't have much to say except that Fujimaki being like a dedicated chef in his spare time is an interesting choice. I feel like it expresses that he's hungry, but he's patient. And that's how a lot of his deals go down. He's willing to entertain Nanbu, in order to have this, what he expects to be an exquisite failure. And that's just like, ugh, ominous. Okay, but yeah, moving on. Yuri.
What a fucking bro. Like, okay, so the first time you see Yuri and Joe interact, they literally run into each other, and then they start fighting.
They square up to. They don't actually.
Yeah. And Yukiko is like, he will kick your ass, Joe. Get the fuck out of here. Mm-hmm. And I don't fight. And that makes Yuri, like, obsessed with Joe. It's very interesting to see how the further Joe gets to fighting Yuri, how more scared Yuri becomes. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily because he's afraid to lose to Joe. Mm-hmm. He's afraid that Joe will be the better boxer. I really like seeing him go from the I want to win guy to I want to fight Joe. Mm-hmm. I don't care who wins. I want to fight it. Their final fight is incredible. Mm-hmm. I also like his in-depth look when he removes his gear. And he has that like kind of not the relapse, the withdrawal from having the gear gone, which also, fucking connects to season 2. And I like that. And then in season 2, he, because of his withdrawal, he's in a wheelchair, but he still is doing everything he loves. He hangs out with Joe. He helps him with, with his comeback tour. I love Yuri. I really do. Mm-hmm. And he has a dog that he loves too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Joe wrecks a motorcycle and Yuri's like, God, I can't not fight him. I really think it's interesting how his character arc is built around like him and his perceived freedom. Like how he meets Joe and realizes like, wow, this is a dude who's just like doing what he wants to do his way. in episode 2, you see him, he's outside, his dog is kind of running around, having fun, and then, Yukiko comes out to talk to him, and as she starts addressing him, his dog sits, and it's like, oh my god, oh, it's the symbolism, oh my god, so here Yuri might feel like he's on top of the world, he gets to do what he wants, he gets to box, but he's domesticated under Shirato's power, and that's such a gigantic contrast to Joe, who's paralleled to a bunch of wild lone wolves who are out there running around and like getting killed off screen so that he can drive by them and feel sad about it. Like it's totally different, right?
Do you think someone purposely was killing dogs so that they could leave him in the front of Joe's motorcycle?
That's what God does.
I gotta make this guy think.
Yeah. Oh my god. Yeah, even when Yuri is physically disabled after his final fight with Joe, he's more free than he was under Shirato. He's able to work with Liu and, visit him and stay by him when things go south there. He gets to go out and visit Team Nowhere. Like, he gets to go and see the people who suddenly matter to him, which really wasn't an option for him before he hung up his coat. So, yeah, good stuff. And all of that, of course, comes with the withdrawal. It's like, well, if you're going to just leave this system, then you're going to feel its sting. You're going to lose a lot of access and convenience that you had, but you get to live a different life now. It's interesting.
Yes, it's good.
Next up, we're on to season 2, Chief.
So I feel like, Chief isn't on screen for long. He has some.
He's got 4 episodes.
Yeah, so Chief is the leader of a community called Casa, and they are immigrants in Japan, and they are trying to get the land rights, right? They want to buy their land so they don't get kicked off of it. Mm-hmm. He's just like a lower ring fighter, but he has this whole mythology about the Nomad and the Hummingbird, and how the Hummingbird shows up to guide the Nomad to where they need to go. And during this time, he is wearing a Hummingbird outfit, Hummingbird gear, mm-hmm. And he beats the shit out of Joe. He just absolutely wrecks him.
Up until Chief flops. Joe is pissed about it. And they have the part where he's like, "Rah!" And then they cut it off,
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
But Chief exists as sort of the character to push Joe to go back to Team Nowhere, to go back to the people he left. Mm-hmm. And he does this by dying in the ring after saving a kid from arson. Mm-hmm.
Not technically in the ring, but the ring is what kills him.
Yeah, he's older. He's like a middle-aged gentleman, and he just gets... He's like, yeah, I'm not going to continue living. Mm-hmm. And so it knocks him on his ass, and it kills him, and he dies. It's really good, and it's really emotional. And then he gives Joe his gear. Mm-hmm. I like Chief. I really do. I think he is a good character. If they're going to kill off a character, I think Chief was the one to do it. Because it allows you to make a lovable character really quick. And just allow it to kind of settle into your gut about how shitty it is for these people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If Megalo Box wants to make its point about Bloodsport, they do it with Chief. And that sucks because Chief deserved to live, but this is the world of Megalo Box. It's like, yeah, you agree it's unfair. So now the rest of these characters are going to go fight against that. And that's why it's important, Honestly, I was ticked off when they took Chief out of the picture because I was enjoying his character so much. He was making that season for me.
Right.
But that's the point. You lose, important people. You lose, wonderful people to, essentially the capitalistic, pushing of a blood sport, and how well it does exploiting people who will die to it. Chief is such a moving character for me. I think that he begins as the spitting image of what Joe always despised. It's this amazing, honest person who has to be less than they truly are in order to get by. Chief is so good at throwing matches that, like, he convinces everybody he lives with that he can't win a match. Like, they just think he's not a very good boxer. But here's Joe analyzing him in a fight, and he can see that Chief is far more sturdy than him, and at the same time a lot more tender of heart too. God, whenever they play the theme of the Nomad, especially when he sings it, I just get weak. Like, it's
good.
And again, like, I had spent time after season 1 assessing my feelings about how Megalo Box is a show about immigration and immigrants, and then here they come swinging in season 2, right out the gate, with a character who is singing in Spanish, and he's rocking dreads, like, it's just like, oh my god, I feel impressed that they went and they did it well. Chief and everything he stands for is like, I think what succeeds in this season. He's a mark of everything that's really successful and different about season 2.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And of course, him dying in the ring, is one of the catalyzing factors that keeps Joe from not doing that. And that's good. Okay, Marla and Mio.
Marla and Mio, I think, are good. Marla is just a incredibly well-designed character. I like her aspect of thinking of how she wanted to find different ways to do it. It's interesting how her and Chief are both protectors of this of Casa, right? But Marla didn't have, she wasn't a boxer. She couldn't flop to get money. And then I there's not much to say about Marla, I think. I did kind of like her as a potential romantic interest for Joe, because they are both very hot. But I liked that. I liked how she kind of acted. It was like the first time Joe's ever had someone close to his age just be like, "Hey, what the fuck are you doing?" I like her support in helping Joe get off painkillers.
Yeah.
And she's also a good engineer. It's one of those things. Megalo Box doesn't have any female boxers, which, you don't normally, if it's,
that could also be
Joe's
a message, but anyways.
Yeah, it could, but every time that there is a character who identifies as female in the show, they always are very helpful. Like, it's never portrayed them as weak or inferior. And I think Marla is an example for that. But Mio is the more interesting character. He's Marla's son. He has a huge sense of self-internalized hate. His character arc is essentially that he hangs out with racists. He is the good one to the racists, right? He is the one that they tolerate, that they allow in their community, because he will join them in harming his family and the people that cared for him. That's a very true to things I've seen. And I like that the show does it. It's not, once again, these character arcs aren't particularly long. And they manage to fit so much emotion in so little time. Yeah.
Mio is like an absolute gut punch. Again, they don't have to have a character be like, you're hanging out with a bunch of racists. You see skinheads and they've all got like the same haircut, and you're just like, oh my god, I know what's going on here. They went there, and all the same, Mio is a character who's given a lot of empathy through his own actions, through other characters' actions, through his position in the community, and as a son to Marla, and as someone who looks up to Chief. He's fixed in all of this. It's truly impressive. It's yet another sign that like they take this seriously when they introduce people of different backgrounds and cultures into the show. They're doing it with research and respect to the struggles they go through. For them to be like, all right, we have a young boy who is growing up in a migrant community, and they're working on buying the land, but they don't have it yet. And they're people are attempting to outbid them to kick them off the land. And here's a character who is responding to that by finding shelter among racists. Like, oof, that you don't get a plot like that out of just your imagination. You have to be able to look at the real world and see, like, this is real danger, this is real suffering. It's so well depicted. And it's one of the reasons why I want people to watch this show, so that they get that in their face too. Marla, I think, is a little tougher to talk about just because she's so damn good.
Yeah.
She's just the goodest good character that's in this season, She's like cool, and she's kind, and she's a badass, and like the first thing that happens is Mio steals Joe's bike and then essentially sells it for scrap, and so Marla commits herself to fixing his bike and paying it back and everything. They're out here trying to buy their land, and Marla's like, well, I still need to pay this guy what we owe him. There's no begging there. She's just got that, like, that steely integrity that Joe's got. It's really good to see. And I think that's why you and I drift towards, like, oh, this would work out. Because they do have that same sort of backbone as characters. There's a lot of like between the two of them. And it's good to see, both of them warm up to each other. I'm just as happy that they don't get together, because I think that what Marla brings to her community is like far more important than the romance plot they could have crammed in. But yeah, just to say, like, Marla's damn good. And that's kind of nice to have when everything else is so rough in Megalo Box Season 2.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Up next, we've got Liu. Kind of a difficult character to talk about, considering, like, he is the stepping stone of this season. He's kind of in the same position where Aragaki was before.
Liu exists to raise all of the death flag. Liu, unfortunately, he's kind of an interesting character. His story is a story of a good boxer's career cut short, and also to further Mac's character arc, and also make you think death.
Mm-hmm. He's literally he's one of the people who tells Joe, like, dude, you're gonna die before you quit boxing.
Yeah.
Like he's one of them.
He's like, yeah, and because he almost does, right? Mm-hmm. And I mean, I like that character arc. Liu could have had his own show, right? He's the reigning Megalobox champion. He looks up to Yuri.
He took Joe out of the picture by beating him in an exhibition match, and essentially causing the plot spiral of this season.
Yeah, I don't really think he has too much of a character arc because he is just tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
He is tragedy, and then he supports Mac.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I can't think of anything.
Yeah.
He's a little like Aragaki. He's a little less cool. I like Aragaki much better.
Yeah. I think it's a little tough to sort of feel the same way about Liu, because his thing is sort of like being shrouded, right? He talks about being trained by Yuri, how he was a nobody to start, but because of who he's being trained by, everyone writes off his success. They say, well, it's because you were trained by Yuri. That's why you're winning. You didn't actually beat Joe. Joe was out of it. And he thinks the same thing. He's like, Joe, I want to fight you again because you were in the worst possible condition. He's got this inferiority complex that's just totally under the weight of idolatry, basically. And that is interesting, So far, we'd been exposed to a lot of characters who are either, like, maximum privilege or zero privileges at all. And Lou's somewhere in the center,
Mm-hmm.
He still was a nobody to start. He says he was, he picked up boxing off the streets and whatever. But still, he did have, a world-renowned champion-winning boxer to coach him. He still got good treatment from that. He's not in the same sort of, like, ground-down position that most of the other characters in the show are. And so that puts him in an interesting place. I think what it comes down to for his character is his realization that what he wants to do, which is to, be successful and to be his own person, he can't do that in a boxing ring. He does have, privileges, and so when he's going up against people like Joe, you're just never going to have the people on your side. I mean, Yuri was in a similar kind of condition. He was all fucked up from his surgery when he fought Joe, but Joe was still the underdog in the end.
Yeah.
So what Liu wants, which is to be what Joe was, he can't have that ever, because that's not his life. He didn't have what Joe had. He didn't have that same kind of suffering. If Liu wants to make a mark on the world, he has to do it collaboratively, and you can't do that in a competitive sport.
Yeah.
Moving right along here, we're almost done with season 2. Mac Rosario.
Mac is an interesting character. Mac is a character that I think is just a very good face of exploitation, mm-hmm. right? Mac is an immigrant, right? Or not an immigrant, but it's muddy, right? There's some references to it, mm-hmm. But he was he got a life-threatening injury, and so did his son. And then Sakuma, the bastard of season 2, helped him. He's like, "Hey, if you, I can keep you alive." And then he's like, "Now you can be my Megalo Boxer." And in doing so, his mental health declines, his ability to think straight declines, his sense of self-agency declines, and Sakamu doesn't give a shit. The corporations don't give a shit, right? He almost kills Liu in the ring, mm-hmm. and everyone is like, "Wow, Mac was a good Megalo Boxer for that." But that's not Mac, right? The times we see Mac, he's calm, he's collected, he's heartfelt, he's warm, and so it's interesting seeing Mac go from a face for an evil company to his own person, mm-hmm. and it's rough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's a family man, which we got say with Marla and Chief, but they're both single parents. Mac has his wife and his son to attend to, Maya and Miguel, and with that he's got essentially high stakes because of what boxing does to him, which is degrade him. It's I personally, I'm obviously going to put weight on the fact that like Mac is a Hispanic man who is being, once again subjugated by Roscoe and the technology. They're basically putting him through as a guinea pig, and they're letting him take all of that weight of mental trauma and like aggressive tendency, and essentially just letting it spill out as it will, because hey, we can fudge some numbers and still get by, and this can still look good for us, with enough like brown nosing and flashing our perfect smiles. Then we're gonna be okay, even if Mac has a time limit on him. That's really rough, as Grant said. Side note, Mac is the best cop because he quit. But
he quit to go do a job that abuses people less, which is beating the shit out of them in a boxing.
But yeah, I mean, he essentially, he was a hero cop, and he was victimized by his dangerous job there, and then his life is saved and cursed by technology which is put upon him. Like, he had no choice. He would either live, he either like, hey, sign this form and we save your husband, or he dies. It's practically like a form of slavery that he's been injected into. He had no option but to opt into advanced technology to keep him alive, but now he is owed back to them. Even if the contract papers don't say that, he has to work with Roscoe on their BES system, the brain encoding system. He has to report to them, so of course they're going to try to hire him. And when you want to work for the person who saved your life. So, not technically, but in all other ways, Mac is essentially in that really bad spot. It's... Whew.
Yeah, it's... Yeah.
Yeah.
Mac is a good rifle. And I like that none of the final fights were the bad guys.
Mm-hmm.
And they weren't even fighting for like a title. It was just a hey, Joe's back fight,
mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like exhibition
just
stuff,
like
basically.
Yeah. So yeah, that's Mac.
Yeah, I was a little worried when they started having the whole like, oh, his brain chip is glitching, and so he'll revert to the mind of a child. He'll get more aggressive and whatnot. I was a little worried about that at first. I feel like there's stereotypes of that, of like aggression and people of color and whatnot. But again, they direct the attention towards problematizing the technology and the research, and him being treated as a guinea pig. That's the issue. Mac, aside from that, is a good person with his feet steady on the ground, and he's having that taken away from him by his Bloodsport career. I think the only thing I've said more often than Bloodsport in this review is interesting. Okay. And next up, and second to last, Sakuma.
Fucking like a legitimate bastard.
Yeah.
Like just the fucking. Okay, I know I said the other guy was the worst. That
Fujisaki.
His name.
Fujimaki.
Yeah, Fujisaki sucks ass, but he's not like a. I mean, he's shit. But like Sakuma is shit because he doesn't think he's shit.
Mm-hmm.
He thinks he's the fucking king of tap,
mm-hmm.
and he tap dances.
Yeah.
What? Like, dude, you're not cool enough to do shit. Sit down, stop and get fucked.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he is a good villain. He's just so good.
Mm-hmm.
Just absolutely hateable, but he's so. One of the things I've been practicing some like writing practices, and it's so hard to make people just bastards, like make villains just bastards. Because you're like, oh, I want them to be kind of relatable, or I want them to, have a reason. How many people are there in the real world that are just bastards? A ton. There's a ton of bastards out there.
There are podcasts about documenting exactly that.
Yeah, it's a good. Right. It's a good. Yeah. And so I love that this guy's just a straight up bastard.
Mm-hmm.
Right. He just wants money. But he's charming and people like him, and you just know that there are dozens of people like him in the real world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In season 1, things are capped off by Joe going off on his own, playing some music and dancing to himself, as a very symbolic scorpion watches from up on a rock. That
Before Joe just chucks the rock at it and kills it, and then another rock hits that rock and flattens
it. That part is so good at humanizing Joe. Oh man, like after this whole season of just punching the shit out of people, he's just out here feeling himself. This is so good. And then in this season, you get Sakuma dancing with his earbuds in, and he's just fucking. He's doing his own stupid little routine, and you're like, oh, fuck this guy, because it's spliced in with footage of a boxing match going on, and he's like orchestrating this all to himself, like like you said, king of the fucking world. Douche. The worst. So hateable. And so well crafted, clearly. This dude is charismatic, and he's optimistic, and he's insightful, and he has no intention of letting any of his morals be compromised. Like, he is so dead set in what he believes, and that makes him like the total adverse character of the show, right? While everyone else is being radicalized by the world of Megalo Box, Sakuma is on top and just like, no, this is fine. He is... makes me mad. Out there, Megalo Boxers are being mutilated and exploited, and Sakuma's perspective on broken eggs never gets challenged, right? Because no one can even step to him and convince him he should listen. All he's done is break eggs, as long as we've seen him. That or watch other people break eggs. He has no reservations about selling out to the military like Yukiko ends up doing, right? Like the part where Yukiko is like attempting to sell Megalobox technology to the military is so awkward and uncomfortable, and it's like it's clearly not working on both ends, right? Like Yukiko's realizing, oh, this is fucked and I don't want to be here, and the military is like, hey, if you think these are weapons, tell us they're weapons so we can go out and use them. Like tell us that this is going to improve our soldiers. Sakuma has none of that. Bold-faced fucking jerk asshole. At this point I'm just insulting him. I'm gonna refocus on my notes here so I can finish this. Episode 9, right? Episode 9, he's speaking with Yukiko about this exact topic, and he literally says wars aren't going anywhere. What kind of asshole do you have to be to say wars aren't going anywhere? Like
just a pure opportunist.
Yeah.
Right? That's all he is. And it's so good.
And that whole conversation, he's letting Yukiko play the pessimist while he claims like none of this was intended. She's like, so what you're saying is you're going to recycle human bodies as soldiers, and he's like, I never said that. You said that. It's that bullshit, right? Like it's
he's such a dick.
Yeah. he gets to play dumb like that. Because, again, how do you unseat this guy? Like, who gets to? When you're part of even Shirato, how do you say, hey, Roscoe, fire this dude because he's a megalomaniac? You can't. Because he's on top of the world. He's that embodiment of corporations not being people. Right?
Yeah.
Sakuma is not people.
Sakuma is not people.
They get to keep their hands off and just profess that, we just wanted the best. Okay, you take us to court, we'll win. Like, it's too real. I hate it. Technically, he gets what he deserves in the end because, like, the research allegations that Mikio and others make against him, like, finally get admitted. But it's not like he ever empathizes with anyone else. He never sympathizes with anybody from up in his ivory tower of positivism and confirmation bias. Like, his character in all of his optimistic speeches and stuff that he does, it feels like he's mindfulness therapy gone wrong in the worst possible way, right? This is like, just live in the moment. Everything's gonna be okay. Like, you can't live in the past. It's all about doing what you can do. Oops, we're part of the war machine. Like, disgusting character. Okay, and now we're beyond Sakuma. And we finally get to talk about Joe.
Joe. What an absolute man that deserved a happy ending.
Yeah.
I like season 1 Joe a lot. I like who I will lovingly refer to as Young Joe. Young Joe was like fucking top of his game, right? Mm-hmm. Best boxer. Just kind of in a shitty position. I love that despite the setbacks he has, Young Joe is such an optimist. Mm-hmm. Right? He thinks he can win. At least a little bit. Right? He every win he gets, his optimism and confidence grows. But it's always been there, right? Even in the lower ring when he's losing, he's like, I can win. Mm-hmm. I'm just not winning. I love that. I love Joe in the first season slowly becoming more and more of a older brother or father figure to the kids. I love him and Yuri's relationship. I love the part where him and Yuri at the end are just beating the shit out of each other. And you don't know who wins before the end of the show, but you do see Joe and Yuri having a cookout together right after that. Right? Because that's Joe. It's a sport, and he knows it. And he is the absolute best person to represent the sport at that time. I think that the decision to have him not use a gear is like very cheesy and tropey, but they make it so good. And it with all the overarching themes, it makes so much sense. But old Joe, season 2 Joe, is exactly how you would make that character have another character arc.
Fine wine.
Yes. You have a character who literally gets everything. At the end of Megalo Box, Joe has his happy ending. Except he doesn't. And you see him again and you wonder what happened, and you see him take the pills, and you see him talk about how, after boxing he took painkillers and got addicted. And he's so broken at that point, right? There is no optimism in him. And so you go from having this character whose entire premise was to be this optimistic boxer to go into a person who's been so defeated that he has to learn to be an optimist again. And it's good.
Yeah.
It's one of the best character arcs I've ever seen in any media. The scene where he's having withdrawals and Casa is super real, but it's also, it's a parallel to Yuri, right? They're trying to do what's right for them as a person. And addiction is a beast to fight. My dad works in social services for stuff like that, and the amount of people that get addicted on accident is so high, right? So they never vilify Joe for being an addict. He just is.
Yeah, they'll always say like it's the cheap painkillers. They'll specify that.
Yeah, and it's incredible how well they walk this line of, hey, Joe's a piece of shit, but not because he's addicted to painkillers. And I love the scene when he goes back to nowhere, and there's this kind of sense that he thought he'd be welcome back. Right? Like, there's a sense that some people would be excited to see him. Because when Oicho sees him and doesn't react, he gets uncomfortable. And I like that. I like that, you know, there is at least a little bit of underlayer that Joe still thinks so highly of himself. And then, you know, he goes from being the Nomad. One of my favorite parts in that show is, you know, you see Chief, and Chief is Max Hummingbird. And then Chief gives Joe his gear, and then Joe is now Max Hummingbird. And they paint it in this way because Mac knows the story, Joe knows the story, and Chief knows the story. And once again, that just gives that red flag. You're like, oh, Joe's dead. I love the ending of that series, where he gives Sachio the bike. I don't even know where Sachio was going. Where the fuck was Sachio going?
School.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he's going, and then he takes the truck back, and you're like, oh no. And he just drives. And his connection with Coach in that is so detailed, and you can see the regret and how Coach coming back is always comforting him. It's really interesting because as much as it is a figment of his imagination, I don't think that the Coach is still Coach. Nabuyo is still him. And the final scene where him and Mac are fighting, and Sachio throws the towel in, right? He's like, Joe, you lost. There is just this nice sense of relief that you get. And it's also kind of like where Sachio and Joe finally see eye to eye. I love Joe as a character.
Yeah.
He should not have shaved his head.
Also true. Yeah. He is a true underdog. Like the most underdog that I've ever seen. This is the picture of resilience, right? He's got no citizenship, no easy way back in, no money except what immediately goes back into low grade gear that's like actually falling apart as he's fighting matches. That and like travel to go back into illegal blood sports where he fights more, right? Like, it's absolute rock bottom. And I don't think it's coincidental that his loss in between the two seasons brings him back underground. It's true that at the end of season 1, as satisfying it is, he still had more to learn. I agree that he has like a strong belief in himself and like this like sense of optimism. There's a part early on, a quote that I saved. Abuhachi is talking about how he's overly generous with, say, Joe constantly wrecking his bike, and then he'll fix it up for him and everything. And he mentions that his ex-wife would tell him that his humble living comes from a kind of trust. And the idea is he's kind of saying the same is true about Joe. And I believe that. Joe is a tough character, but he's got these soft edges. He is not like a typical Jotaro Kujo type of anime character who's just maname, tough, I'm gonna break through, and it's good. He's resilient, but he's more than that. He's good at hiding when he's not resilient. And that makes him really special to me. He feels anxiety and loss, and you see that in his body language. There's an early fight where he's taking blows and he's blocking them. And after a hit from Gear, his arms are shaking. Like it's ambiguous whether it's just the blow from the punch or if that's his body kind of like instinctively seizing up. But all the same, like, he does react to pain. He's just usually good at hiding it. The fact that he touches walls or just touches things to ground himself when he's feeling anxious, that's really real. And it's a sign of what I think his character goes through, which is being alone and finding something to keep yourself upright. When Joe feels anxious, he'll trace his fingers along the wall because that's something solid, something that he can lean up against when he can't stand on his own 2 feet. And all throughout season 1 and then again through season 2, what he's doing is he's finding a community. He's finding that although he fights alone in the ring, he doesn't live alone. And in fact, he's dying without people. It's the scorpion and the frog story where a frog helps a scorpion across a river. Then the scorpion instinctively stings the frog anyways, and they both drown. And that's true and not true of Joe. He is someone who is, as far as we can see, built to fight. But he evolves far beyond that, to the point where he's no longer just using his hands to hit people, he's using them to create things. He's rebuilding Team Nowhere in whatever little ways he can. He's talking to Aragaki or Sachio, and here's got his box of nails, and he's going to start pounding them because that's something he can do right now, and that's very different from the way he went about things before. Again, I also think I'm glad that he lives. There's a bit of anticlimax in that, but good. That's what it's supposed to be.
I think it's part of his growth, right? Like, Joe wanted to die, right? That's kind of he didn't know where he belonged.
Yeah,
and I think him living gives him a lot more nuance to who he is as a person.
Yeah, because all this time Joe didn't really have someone or something to live for, and now he does.
Yeah,
even by the end of season 1, a lot of it's still tenuous. He's got his victory and everything, but once he shakes that off, what's he gonna do? The little community they build up with Team Nowhere or something, but he still hasn't entirely figured out what his purpose is there, except to keep it going by still doing boxing. So in season 2, it's all about learning the other ways he can live on and contribute. Whew. Okay. Now,
I don't think do we need to talk about
I can
themes?
blast through some. I don't think this is the kind of show that lends itself to reductive, like, thematic analysis. If I try to bring this down to one axiom, I feel like that loses a lot of what the show's done. And we've talked so much about what the show accomplishes anyways. My God. So, I'm just going to talk about some major messages, and mostly how things change from season 1 to season 2. You could kind of wrap everything up in this nice packaging, by focusing on the nomad. A nomad has nothing to lose when you're out there on your own, but they also have nothing to live for. And so I think that a lot of times this show, in its arcs, moves towards community, moves towards found family, moves towards, infrastructure that's not built by assimilation, but rather people having the resources to stand up for themselves, and then growing in that more organic way. That's the challenge that characters like Joe and Yuri face, they need to strike it on their own, but if they just make it on their own, then what is there to do from there? They have to find people that they relate to and then, find their glue with them. They need to be free, but, being free alone stands for nothing, and it doesn't change the circumstances that they've hated uphill all this time. So in season 1, I feel like although they do come together as Team Nowhere, there's still a lot that's about becoming an individual and like self-discovery in a way that keeps them apart. They're not truly there yet. Those things being desperation and martyrdom, you know, where we have these characters who are essentially left without family and, you know, are stranded on their own, and they have to come together at all costs to, you know, essentially live on. Militarization and technology. You know, individuals are participating in Megalo Box, and they're spotlighted. Sure, they get their fame and they get some money out of it, but that's an individual thing too. Their coaches don't really get recognized, you know, nor the teams that are behind them or that they're a part of. It's just you up in the ring, and that's the face that's getting sold by Megalonia, by, you know, whoever is sponsoring or participating in Megalo Box as a sport. And so that keeps them separate, right? Because there's only one person who gets to go and stand up there and fight. And so, you know, that's an exploitative force. You know, you, in your exploitation, you're a great advertisement for us corporations. And, you know, we're essentially going to put you through that ringer to our benefit. And that is the way to get their living. But again, it's not, you know, it's not supported, it's not scaffolded. And of course, nature and integrity, this also plays in. Where, you know, like I said, it's the frog and the scorpion story, basically. You know, where there is this sense of, like, you know, wanting to just go it alone and, you know, bet it all, and, you know, all these other rapturous habits that are built out of being in survival mode. But they've got to overcome those things if they want stability in season 2. Death is a big thing that, you know, starts turning things around. You know, Nanbu is a wake-up call. Joe realizes he can't live alone, you know, and he's, you know, essentially failed everyone he lives with by being away, losing a match while Nanbu passed away. And so that, you know, would keep him apart. When he meets Chief, he sees a world that's, you know, communally supported. It's a greater body that lives and is made up of lots of cells, lots of people. And sure, people like Chief die, people like Nanbu die, but the community lives on because it's a greater living thing than just the single people that make it up. He gets to watch someone, you know, in a horrible tragedy lose their life, but everyone keeps going in spite of that. Everyone, you know, finds a way to celebrate what Chief lived for rather than letting everything fall apart. And then over time, everyone sort of grows to disarm themselves, you know, break away from the formal powers that they've taken part in. And that leads to creation and repurposing. As I already mentioned, Joe's sitting there, you know, nails and hammer and pop, 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 going away at it. Everyone comes together to rebuild the Nowhere Gym. Small businesses like Bonjiri's restaurant and Marla's shop, you know, are these service-driven places that really don't care for profit as long as everyone can come there and hang out, and, you know, it can help everybody function, you know, and that's very different than everything else in the Megalo Box world. The amusement park being reclaimed for everyone, you know, another sign of that. The way they keep that place running is by everyone putting their elbow grease in, you know. There is no living in living alone. And despite all the Shirato Corporation's missteps, it thrives on the development of technology for public use. So even in that case, right, you know, creation is still an integral part here, even if it's not really acknowledged as such. You know, there's dissent sown in by Mikio and Sakuma's malpractice, but, you know, aside from that, there is good that it exists there. Just not so good when it's profit-driven and built into people punching each other out for a living. And this all accumulates into breaking the violent cycle. Sachio chooses to live independently as a safeguard against loss originally, but on his own, he can't really put his true skills to use. You know, if he wants to provide a service, like Bonjiri, like Marla, then, you know, he has to do that with people. And so he has to utterly be defeated by Joe to come to terms with that. To see, okay, you know, I can do better by working with people rather than against them. Mac once lived to protect and serve, and he was following in Joe's footsteps with his gear. But, you know, he loses sight of what he has as a result. The more Mac uses Mac time, the more he regresses, and none of the money of his career can replace him and his family unit, you know? If he wants to have that family life, he has to give all that up. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. No, I think that mostly covers it. Wow, this is a long video.
How about some hypotheticals to wind down and we'll be done?
Alright, what are some hypotheticals you have for me? I don't have any.
Okay, here we go.
Currently.
You need to take a body blow from one boxer in the cast. Who is it going to be?
Sachio. It's easy. He's like 16. I'm sure it will hurt, but I think I can take it.
Here's why I would not say Sachio. Sachio is gonna use gear for it. I get that impression. If he's like, oh man, I get to punch somebody, I'm gonna make it count, because he probably doesn't get that a lot in matches. And B, he's probably gonna lose it a little bit and hit you for another one. He's probably not just gonna do one. So I would say Liu, because I don't think he would take me seriously enough to do it full force, but he would respect me enough to try to take me down in one punch. So at least I get it done over with quickly. All right.
Yeah.
And last hypothetical. This one's a thinker. After yet another business reboot, Shirato reaches out to you to spearhead their next technology venture, insistent that whatever they develop will not go to the military. What innocent technology do you pursue, and why does it somehow actually still get possibly used in the military?
Sold to the military? Alright. I would get... that's a good question. What are some things that I have wrong with my life that I'm just like inconvenienced constantly?
Well, you can't teleport yet.
I can't teleport yet, but that's going straight to the military. I wish I had a way to... Okay, so I have to wear dress clothes for work, right? I have to dress up because professional, right? I want them to make just like very good clothes so that I do not feel like I'm just sweating in layers, right? And this is what's going to happen. They're going to be like, wow, I can't believe this dress shirt and tie and undershirt are so comfortable and stylish. You look really good. And then the military would be like, well, maybe we can put armor in it. Oh, and then they make really stylish military people who cannot, who are, they use in the military industrial complex to sell $1 bazillion. And then my shirts get sold.
Oh, God. I hate that. Oh, I hate that. Oh, because you know what I'm thinking? I'm imagining like the fucking U.S. Army Twitter account fucking being like, check out her style, and they're posting their stupid fucking gear. And they're like pretending to be all innocent. They're doing the thing with the like, hey, check us out, we're on Twitch, we're playing video games. Like, fuck off. Ugh. Gross.
Oh, you're so right. You're so right.
You made this at Grant. Your brain is astounding. Dude, you should be a writer.
Oh. All right.
Okay. I feel bad. I don't feel like mine's is good now. But anyways, here's my take. After investigating Mac's brain functions for irregularities, Shirato ends up investing in AI, which reads body language to construct more appropriate conversations with real people. So they go into conversational AI, right?
Yeah.
But then the military wants to pick this up so that they can use this tech to interrogate their spouses about the affairs they're having back home.
Jesus. That's very sad.
Remember, everyone, help your friendly neighborhood bootlicker by keeping their partners company.
All right, I believe that's all we have to say about Megalo Box. Yeah. Brantley, what's the next show we're doing?
Hopefully, Revolutionary Girl Utena. If we can finish in time, we still got plenty of that show to go through.
Yeah,
but
I got a new job, and it starts this Monday, so it's a lot to work with, and I'm good. It's working. I'm excited for it, but I have been insanely busy this week.
So we'll see what we can do. We may end up like delaying or swapping to something else if needed. But that's what's on the table. Outside of that, we've got some other things we're just generally excited for, and if you just want to hear more of us before then, we've been streaming every Monday on Twitch. So if you want to see us play video games, and by that I mean Deadly Premonition 2, a blessing in disguise.
Deadly Premonition 2, blessing in disguise.
Drop by.
Thank you for listening to our episode. If you liked what you heard, you can go check out some of our other stuff. We have a short video that is a couple of our goofiest laughs. Follow us on Twitter. We'll link it in the description. But you don't need to do any of that because we are not your dads.